just when you thought it can never get crazier than this. And I mean never. Then you start to realize that things are crazier than this.
How do we not know? She said, well, I know it's not true. I was like, what? Where are you plucking this out of thin air? You're plucking this out of the clear blue sky. You've never even watched a horror movie. How do you even know about the Amityville horror? She's like, I know about the Amityville horror, boy. She goes, it's not true. I was like, I am so confused. What are you talking about? There's no way this could be true. How are you coming up with this story? Like, what the heck is going on? And she said, well, you know I worked at the diocese. I said, yeah. She goes, well, I was the secretary to the priest. I go, yeah? The priest made the story up. I go, yeah. She's like, with the family that lived there. I'm like, okay. She goes, then the priest hired the writer. I'm like, okay. She goes, I saw the whole thing. I was there. I had the conversations with them. I saw what was going on. It's not true.
Hello, everyone. Once again, this is Dare to Speak. I feel that I have to talk about this particular subject, this video, ever since I first was told about it by a family member, and I heard the podcast. It's on Google. It's called Conversations with My Grandmother. And this is having to do with the Amityville Horror House. That in fact, that most of what happened was actually fictional. That the Lutz, Kathy and George Lutz, conspired with the priest, the one who blessed the house. They conspired together to exaggerate, to completely exaggerate what actually happened in that house in order to make money off of it, profit. Now, this is according to this podcast. Now, whether it's true or not, I can't really say yes or no. I honestly don't know. However, I do believe it's important enough to bring to an attention. And there's a lot of crazy stuff, very disturbing things that I've heard. I did bring the attention that George Lutz was into the paranormal and witchcraft and things like that. And he was responsible for what happened in that house. And it wasn't because of some demon that or a bunch of evil spirits that possessed the house long before they even moved in. And with Ronnie DeFeo and his family, it had nothing to do with any kind of demonic activity whatsoever. You know, coming from that family, which led to that massacre. What really started it was George Lutz practicing the paranormal or the occult, if you will. Now, here's more from what I heard. I just picked a small part from it, and I just want you to judge for yourself and just give me your honest opinion.
And she said, well, you know I worked at the diocese. I said, yeah. She goes, well, I was the secretary to the priest. I go, yeah? The priest made the story up. I go, yeah. She's like, with the family that lived there. I'm like, okay. She goes, then the priest hired the writer. I'm like, okay. She goes, I saw the whole thing. I was there. I had the conversations with them. I saw what was going on. It's not true. And she went on and on and on into detail and gave me like a synopsis in our first conversation about what happened. I was in shock. I was so confused. But I realized the more she talked about what she saw, what she went through, it was more than just, oh, it's not true. It's the Amityville horror is not true. It developed into a very layered, meaty story of a vast amount of themes and cast of characters that affected her. And I was just in shock because I remember growing up and seeing the family on the Donahue show and early morning talk shows. And the more that I'm like, hey, Grandma, well, they were on Donahue. And she's like, oh, it was full of shit. She goes, I took that phone call. I told them not to go. Like, and she had a story or a connection or a confirmation for everything that I threw out at her and said, well, the movie, she goes, oh, it's such full of shit. And she came into the conversation with like all these insights. And I'm like, wait a minute, okay. She's really dotting these I's and crossing these T's here. Like, oh boy, like there's something going on. I think she's right now, oh boy. And then she just went into more and more detail and the different layers and the different themes of what was going on. And it became apparent that literally like this Amityville horror was in fact her nightmare. She had carried this burden for so many years, never told anybody, not even her coworkers knew what was going on. And then I said to her, like, what was your role through all of this? And she was actually at an interesting part too, because her role was basically the intake person at the church for any families in the community that had any kind of issues at home. Because back then, therapy was still very much looked down upon and not accepted. And so the community really leaned into the church. The church was there to help cure and resolve. So when families had issues, the first stop would be to my grandmother's office, and she would do these intakes and create these reports. Now the reports took statements from families, neighbors, or any participants that would contribute. And there were stories of children that were having bad behavior, and nowadays it would be just classified as ADD. But it was anything from that to wives, depressed housewives, or wives that felt resentful because they couldn't work because the husband wouldn't let them go to work. And then there were stories of the men in the household that were either thinking about cheating or took on that action and actually did. And so my grandmother had this role of like working with all of these stories and being confidential. So she built this rapport with people in the community, so people trusted her. And that was her way of also learning about different scenarios that could happen, different temperaments and personalities. So the more cases that she worked on, she built up her intuition. So she was able to see, frankly, bullshit coming from a mile away. And that's how she was able to kind of really maneuver a lot of the situations that were happening around the Amityville horror story. So she built up this wall and knowledge and was able to make the next move in her career. She wasn't taken seriously and she was degraded. And some of the themes that I'll be going into in other episodes will be the dynamics of my grandmother and the workplace, and then also too, her boss was a closeted homosexual that just had bad behavior, and there was absolutely no accountability. And then there's the dynamics between the priest and the family, which was highly inappropriate and major conflict of interest, because the family, if they walked in and they truly had this paranormal activity going on in their home, it wouldn't necessarily be a movie made about it because those are confidential files within the church. So the fact that this was actually revealed, in many ways, it's a conflict of interest with the church. And reality is that there was an inappropriate relationship between the priest and the family.
It's up to you to tell me what you think. I would like to hear your opinion on that, on this. I do plan to do another continuation of this, in which she actually finds out from what this woman was telling her, from what this woman was saying for her statement to whoever she was reporting this to, about what actually happened in the office when the priest that blessed the house at Amityville, some very dark secrets about him. And this is something for you to draw your own conclusion of as well. But according to this woman who kept this secret for many years, so they said there was pretty much a conspiracy to make money off of making a movie and writing a book on it, finding someone who would write a book so the Lutz, George and Kathy Lutz, can make a great deal of money, and as well as the priest, Father Ralph. And again, this is part one, and part two is going to have to do with what actually happened in the workplace that was very disturbing. So if you like this video, give it a thumbs up. I am going to make a part two to this, a continuation. Questions or comments, you know what to do. And to all of you, take care.